We may not always have the perfect conception of what God will have us do with our lives. Nonetheless, it is of utmost importance to be faithful in present service as we wait upon God's guidance. In the Bible, we read of Moses, who for 40 years kept Jethro's flock in the hills and plains of Midian. His faithful work as a shepherd prepared him to lead the Israelites 40 years through the wilderness. We also read of Amos, a herdsman, whom God elevated to the office of prophet. History's record of John Harvey Kellogg shows a young man eager to serve the Lord as a teacher. At the age of 20, he began a teacher's training course. However, soon after Kellogg started his training as a teacher, it became perfectly clear that the Lord would have him serve in a different way. The Lord led Kellogg into the medical field, where he was a blessing and a help to many. In similar fashion, Nairobi Central Seventh-day Adventist Church had its beginnings not as a church, but as a boarding facility for students. Adventism in Kenya began at the Gandia Mission in Kindu Bay. Gandia was established in 1906 as the first Seventh-day Adventist mission field in Kenya. Through God's help, the missionaries were able to make inroads in the vast western region of the country. A lot of toil was put into this region, and the Lord brought the increase. As the Lord blessed the missionaries' efforts, more fields opened up, and in 1933, Spencer G. Maxwell, superintendent of the East Africa Union, moved the union offices from Gandia to Nakuru. In the same year, Walter Wesley Armstrong established Karura Station in central Kenya. This was part of an effort in setting up a central Kenya mission. In April 1937, Maxwell once more relocated the union offices to Crawford Road, Nairobi. Nairobi was quickly becoming a commercial center, and its central location was optimal for the expanding work. Crawford Road will later be renamed Milimani Road. It is presently known as Jakaya Kikwete Road. But how did Maxwell end up running a student hostel? In 1896, the British government started construction of the 1,060-kilometer Uganda Railway. The British state-owned Uganda Railway was the company tasked with connecting the bustling port town of Mombasa with the inland areas of what are now the countries of Kenya and Uganda. In 1902, Uganda Railway built a school for the children of its European workers in a location close to its Nairobi station. European settlers and missionaries also began to send their children to this school, which had come to be known as Nairobi European School. Around 1916, the school was moved to Nairobi Hill, present-day Upper Hill. During this period, a few more schools opened in Nairobi. However, by 1918, there seemed to be a dissatisfaction amongst the population. The Nairobi Chamber of Commerce issued a complaint about the education situation in their town. Their complaints included insufficient buildings for classes, inadequate sporting facilities, and the absence of boarding facilities for students. It appears that this disagreeable status quo was still in place when 19 years later, Maxwell moved to Nairobi. Several children of Adventist missionaries in East Africa attended the Nairobi European School, which is presently known as Nairobi Primary School. The absence of boarding facilities prompted Maxwell to rent a house on Crawford Road, which is a walking distance to the school. Mrs. Pearson, wife to Rex Gordon Pearson, who was the secretary of the Kenyan mission field, managed this hostel. At some point, the land on Crawford Road was purchased, and in September 1947, the Adventist-run hostel added a school, Maxwell Preparatory School, to its portfolio. The school was most likely named after the then superintendent of the East Africa Union, that is, Spencer G. Maxwell, the man who oversaw the expansion of the work in the Central Kenya Mission. Maxwell Preparatory School was established to offer Adventist education for the children of missionaries posted in East Africa. It took 2 years to lay down organizational structure in the school, and in September 1949, Sabbath services became regular on campus. 1956 saw the setting up of the Highlands Mission in Eldoret. This was follow-up of work which an Adventist farmer and later on politician, David Sparrow, began at his Ndege farm in Burnt Forest region of Uasin Gishu. The purpose of the Highlands mission was to spread the Adventist message to the Europeans. This work was brought to Crawford Road, where a church was set up for the very same purpose. Pastor D. Ringering became the church's first pastor. As the European community was being reached, the African community was not left behind. Pumwani Social Hall in Majengo was the place African Adventists in Nairobi congregated. By mid-1950s, the congregation numbers had outgrown the social hall's capacity, and there was a clear need for the congregation to acquire their own land and build a church. Towards this end, the Lord blessed, and in March 1958 in Chalmers Square, present-day Shaurimoyo locality, a completed Shaurimoyo church was dedicated. On the other side of town, Maxwell Church was also being dedicated. You see, although Sabbath services had been taking place in the Crawford Road property since 1949, it was not until 1958 that a sanctuary was built. Here is a lesson for us. With both church congregations, they did not wait to have everything in place before they partook in fellowship. The church at Shaurimoyo did not wait to have its own land and church in order to congregate. They hired out a hall and had their worship. For 9 years, the church on Crawford Road congregated using the buildings that were available to them. They did not wait to have an official sanctuary building before congregating. Today we see this model replicated with churches and Sabbath schools congregating in school halls, tents, social halls, and open fields. God's presence cannot be contained to a particular place. King Solomon, who built a most splendid, awe-inspiring house of worship, acknowledged this in 1 Kings 8:27, where he asked, "But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, the heaven and heaven of heavens cannot contain thee. How much less this house that I have builded?" It is important to note that although most congregants at Maxwell Church were of European descent, Africans were not barred from attending church services. Likewise, although most congregants at the Shaurimoyo Church were of African descent, Europeans were not stopped from joining the fellowship. Language was a defining barrier. Maxwell Church conducted worship in English, whereas Shaurimoyo Church conducted it in Swahili. In the early 1980s, Maxwell Preparatory School, now called Maxwell Adventist Academy, moved from Crawford Road to a 60-acre property off Magadi Road in Ongata Rongai, about 25 kilometers from Nairobi's CBD. During this period, another school was established at the Crawford Road property, Maxwell Adventist Preparatory School, or better known as MAPS. Both schools were similar in that they were established to offer Adventist education. Where they differed was that Maxwell Adventist Academy offered the American system of education, whereas MAPS offered the 844 Kenyan system of education that began in 1985. In 1989, the East Africa Union offices were relocated from Invagara Grove, presently known as Vanga Road in Lavington, Nairobi, to the compound that housed Maxwell Church and MAPS. Sabbath, 2nd October 1982, signaled the start of the Adventist Church Global Evangelistic campaign titled 1,000 Days of Reaping, under the leadership of the General Conference President, that is, Pastor Neil Clayton Wilson. The church hoped to bring in 1,000 people to the fold each day globally for 1,000 days, ending Sabbath of June 15, 1985. Total member involvement was encouraged. Between the commencement of this evangelistic campaign and January 1985, 65,000 new members had been added to the East Africa Union, which comprised of Kenya and Uganda. Maxwell Church was filled to the brim, and at this point the church commissioned construction of a new building. The new sanctuary was completed in 1995, and the church was renamed Nairobi Central Seventh-day Adventist Church. As of April 2022, membership is over 7,500.